get on my way, I'm gonna be doing this. If you get hit, it's your own fault.
Ladies, gentlemen, and Forge Knights of all ages, in a game series that so heavily focuses on guns, variety of guns, amount of guns, size of guns, sometimes it's fun to just shove the guns to the side and go around punching things, or in our case today, swinging elemental axes at them. Today we're going to take Amon, the Forge Knight, to his absolute melee-based limit in a way that, with the current way the game works, can scale literally infinitely, breaking the damage calculations of the game and hitting numbers so big the training dummy can't even show them to you anymore. But you can build this up on bosses as well, you can build it up on random enemies while walking around, and it just absolutely shreds after a little bit of ramp-up time at the start of a combat. The main interaction causing this to happen is Groundbreaker, the specialization node that stores all non-melee and slam damage and then adds it to your next melee attack. And then the fact that this counts for bonus damage that is applied to melee skills. Amon having a prime way to take advantage of that in the form of the Berserk passive, which gives you bonus damage as Cryo. This applies to our melee, and because of this, it breaks the intended function of Groundbreaker. The bonus damage applied from Berserk counts as non-melee damage, and so it gets stored up and applied to your next melee because of Groundbreaker. But the damage that Berserk's Cryo does scales off of the initial damage of the melee hit, which includes Groundbreaker. So this leads to an infinite feedback loop where every time you melee an enemy, it increases the damage that is stored and increases the damage that you deal, which means even with literally just these two things put together, you can technically infinitely ramp your damage, but it would take a long time to do that. So the entire point of this build around it is using this interaction, increasing the ramp up speed as much as possible, to the point that you can kill some of the hardest bosses in the game on the hardest difficulty in only a handful of swings. And when you're mobbing, you're basically just role-playing as a psycho, and as someone who dearly misses playing as Krieg in Borderlands 2, well, this is the closest that I have found in Borderlands 4. So let's break down everything you need to know to be able to play this build for yourself. Starting off with the skill point spending, I absolutely do not recommend using this build until not just endgame, but not until you have at least 20 specialization points, which is the minimum requirement to get the node that triggers all of our damage scaling in Groundbreaker. That said, for skill points themselves, our action skill is going to be Crucible. This normally is used to throw out some axes and prime detonations and then explode them, some other funkier alternative stuff too, but something most people don't even think to do is while you are holding the action skill actively in your hands, you can melee and it will swing with the axes. This counts as both melee and action skill damage at the same time because you are meleeing with the action skill, so you can scale both of them upwards. It splits your damage back and forth between Incendiary and Cryo depending on which axe you swing, which is lovely in itself, and arguably most importantly, it just swings melees out way faster than the standard default punch melee. Like, it's more than double the speed of the basic punch, and the speed of our melees is what makes us ramp up as quickly as possible. As well, we are using the Axe and Stone augment on this, which gives us 40% bonus movement speed after hitting someone with a thrown Forge Axe. Sadly, this does not count for melee hits with the Forge Axes, just the thrown one, but the movement speed is incredibly important in this setup for general mobbing, just to let you actually get into melee range of an enemy as quickly as you can. As well, the Axe and Stone augment gives us action skill cooldown when we detonate a Flame Axe, which just helps us maintain action skill uptime a little bit more. That said, in the green tree, we literally are only going to be taking 5 points, which are going to go into Gathering Storm for increased general element damage as a kill skill. We have excellent kill skill synergy. We will have this permanently active even in boss fights, but this is mostly just so we can pick up our desired augment right here. In the blue tree then, the Vengeance tree, we're going to be spending exactly 3 points specifically into the Thrill. This is just a very powerful survivability specific passive for the cost of 3 skill points. We're going to be playing in a way where we will have 0 shield, but generate overshield every time we deal melee damage. So in between those bits of overshield, and while we are ramping up our damage to begin with, the extra health regen from this is very nice to have. Then we come to our red tree, where the bulk of our skill points are going to be spent in this build, in most Amon builds, because it's just a very strong tree, even if you're not using the actual action skill from it. That said, 3 points go right into Impetus, as it is a kill skill that gives us shield regeneration rate and movement speed per stack. Again, the movement speed is super important for us, that is the main reason we take this, but the increased shield regeneration does translate to occasional damage damage spikes for us as well. We take 5 points into Discombobulate for increased critical chance with melee attacks, pretty straightforward. All of our main damage is either melee or scales off of our melee, so critical hit chance with those increases our damage dramatically. 5 points into Titanium Knuckles for increased melee damage and skill damage. Both of these things apply because when we're meleeing with the Forge Axes with Crucible active, this does again count as skill damage, so it boosts both parts. Then we put 3 points into Gut Punch, which gives us the weakness debuff on enemies when we melee them. This won't really help for little enemies because they will die in 1 or 2 hits consistently anyways, but for bosses, especially ones that have shield health bars at the front of their health bar, which are resistant to both of our main damage types as a result, this just helps us both ramp faster and gain survivability when it applies, so that a longer boss fight isn't even a problem to be within. And while shield-based bosses do take a little bit longer to ramp up your damage against to begin with, they still are not slow to kill by any means. After that, 1 point in Forged in Steel for immunity for 6 seconds after we use our Forge skill. We have the base Crucible Forge skill, and the only important part of it to know really is that it has a 30-second cooldown, so this combo gives us 6 seconds of immunity once every 30 seconds, which we do actually use for a damage-based purpose as well. 3 points into the best defense over here on the right. This gives us overshield gained for a percentage of the melee damage that we deal. You can survive most situations with only 1 point in this. 5 points is definitely too much, but 3 points feels like the sweet spot to me personally, where I wasn't dying during the ramp up against shield-based health bosses on UVH 5. 5 points into the Fray in the middle branch. This is just a really solid passive. It provides damage increase and damage reduction against close enemies, and given that all of our damage is melee, really, we will always be this close, so this will be at its full bonus. 5 points into Berserk is a passive, which gives you bonus cryo damage on your guns and melee. This bonus damage part of our melee does not count as melee damage itself, it counts as a separate damage type, which is what then makes Groundbreaker feedback loop into itself. I've got 4 extra ranks of Berserk from my class mod to scale this as hard as possible. I don't know if more ranks are possible, but it is the highest that I've seen. 3 ranks, and there is only red over here. It is a kill skill to both restore duration on Berserk so that you can keep it up infinitely, but also it increases the damage bonus from Berserk itself. This hitting a full 10 stacks is what makes us ramp up our damage so quickly, because at that point you've got like a 600% increase on 54% of your melee damage being bonus cryo damage if you have the ranks that I do, and all of that is pouring extra scaling into Groundbreaker on every melee hit we do. We then take 5 points into Brimming Vigor over here for increased maximum health and increased melee damage the more full our health is, which is quite solid of a combination. And then we take 3 points into My Touch is Death for 24% chance to activate all kill skills whenever we deal melee damage. This is what lets us ramp up There Is Only Red and Berserk even against bosses without having to kill any adds, because we will just activate those effects without needing to actually kill things. An important thing to mention as well, if you get downed and have to go into Second Wind, the Berserk stacks will stay applied, so your gun damage is actually also quite silly, which makes it easy to get yourself back up with whatever gun happens to be in your hands. Berserk then stays active even after you stand up. It doesn't reset even if you go down, which is massive for sustaining our power within this setup. That does it for the skill points then, so let's talk about our specialization. First 20 points into Runner on the right side, and as you do so, you will want to pick up Bare Arms for 50% of gun damage increases applied to melee. We don't have much in the way of gun damage increases in this build, but what little we do will help with you having this. It makes our ramp up happen a bit faster, and that's the most important thing for us. You can take Bullet Train for now in the beginning, but it will definitely be replaced later on, and the main reason that we spend these points first is to get to Groundbreaker. This is the main cause of damage ramping and scaling with melee in general, with any melee-based build in the game right now. It is super important. After that, 10 points into Sharpshooter, and we do that to unlock Daredevil. 5 points into Daredevil, and we can then take Now with Caffeine. This is basically an emergency button. Rep Kit restores 25% of action skill cooldown, but it's worth noting that Crucible's cooldown is counted as the full 3 axes, so 25% of that cooldown being restored is almost 1 full axe, which means if you ever run out of axes for whatever reason, if you mismanage them, if you die and stand back up, if you pop a Rep Kit, it will pretty much immediately give you 1 charge back ready to go. After that, your next choice depends on your stats. If you are able able to get your maximum health to be higher than your maximum shields, then 20 points into Survivor in order to unlock the best defense is the best choice that you can make. This gives you up to 30% bonus damage based on how full either your shields or health are, whichever is higher. Our setup puts us at an empty shield constantly, so you need to have higher maximum health than shields for this to make sense. If you don't, then instead your goal for a fourth node would be a honed mind over here for action skill crit chance and action skill critical damage. Past that, we just shove points into runner for both melee damage and movement speed, both of which are quite important for us, honestly. As for your weapons, literally anything will do to hold it in your hands. Nothing actually boosts melee damage in your hands in Borderlands 4, not even the weapons with bayonets on them. So the main thing your weapon is for is to get you back up if you get downed by enemies from range. That said, there is one thing I recommend picking up specifically, which is a Ripper sniper rifle with the target marker underbarrel. This only seems to spawn on Ripper snipers specifically, and it does a small bit of damage, but then also makes the target take 35% bonus damage for 8 seconds afterwards. And this increases damage they take from any source, so this essentially makes us ramp up 35% faster while it is applied. And the gun is also fine to get yourself up when you get downed, as it will get a bunch of bonus damage from Berserk being active no matter what. There is no direct farm source for one of these, as it is not a legendary, but just keep an eye out for Ripper snipers and look at them and see if they have this modifier. For the rest of your items then, triple bypass legendary rep kit is useful. It's not a requirement, but it is an ideal choice, and the ideal modifier on any rep kit for us by far is hard hitter. This increases melee damage by a large amount for 10 seconds after you use your rep kit, which is pretty much exactly what we want. Triple bypass is useful for this because it has 3 charges, and it has a chance to replenish a charge on kill. In single target, no fight will last longer than 30 seconds, so 3 charges of this is basically just full uptime for hard hitter. While mobbing, you will be killing enemies frequently enough to get the free charge refills, so you can just have it active either way. And it just being 3 charges also means that we can always try to keep 1 charge in reserve for if we ever run out of our action skill charges, so we can use one to replenish one. As for how to get this for yourself, it is a dedicated drop from the Back Hive boss, who is located in this auger mine you can find right outside of Zadra's underground lab in the Fade Fields region. If you don't have this, you can manage just fine with any rep kit that has hard hitter. It doesn't have to be a legendary even. Ideally, it could be an order one, which have 2 charges as well. For our ordnance, you can of course just use the Jakobs guaranteed crit knives that every build and their mother is using. Guaranteed crits do make this ramp up faster, but I'm not using it because I find that item boring and it just isn't needed to make this build insanely strong. Instead, I'm using a fish. Slippy is a grenade that counts as dealing melee damage when it explodes. It also splits into 3 other fish and bounce on the spot 3 times. So it's essentially 9 instances of melee damage per grenade. This does not scale with Groundbreaker, as Groundbreaker only triggers on literal melees, not any melee damage, which is why Groundbreaker also doesn't trigger from thrown forge axes, only direct melees while you're holding them. What this does do though is give us 9 chances to activate kill skills from our kill skill on melee passive, and you can throw 2 of these out together in a row for 18 chances at that activating. And this at the start of combat helps you ramp up so much faster, on top of the fact that even outside of Groundbreaker we have a ton of melee damage boosts, and this is just Ordinance that counts as melee damage to begin with, so it just fits this build like a glove. Or a fish, I guess.
The fishes! They seek revenge!
As for modifiers, extra charge or lower cooldown are the ideal 2 options. Extra charge will let you throw 3 of them out at the start of combat for faster ramp up time. Lower cooldown lets you throw them out during actual combat more frequently, but you do want to be a bit careful with that because they can self-damage you, so I only recommend throwing these during your 4 skill immunity duration, which is honestly a large part of why we even have the passive node for that taken in general. As for how to get Slippy, this is a rare drop from fishing out in the open world, but also it is a dedicated drop from Shadow Mom, who is the boss of the Auger Mine in the center of the Terminus Range region right here. This also happens to be the weekly extra large Encore boss right now, so you have higher chances of having this drop right now than you would otherwise. Then for our class mod, we've got the Shatter White legendary, because it's the only one to my knowledge that can roll with Berserk ranks on it. Berserk is a massive part of our damage scaling, and so the 4 ranks I've got from that are massive. As well, 45% increased cryo damage applies to our Berserk bonus damage for more scaling, and my specific one has bonus maximum health, which is why I'm able to use these specialization options that I am. The main important thing on this though is purely the Berserk passive ranks, as many as you can get, and you may be looking at the description of the actual legendary effect on this and think, well, why aren't we using Scourge and using Forge Waves if they're now melee attacks? But while the Forge Waves deal melee damage, they do not count as melee attacks, which means that you cannot get it to scale off of Groundbreaker, so that effect doesn't actually help what we're doing here. As for how to get this for yourself regardless, it is a dedicated drop from the boss of the Vault in the Terminus Range region. After that, we've got our shield, which is the Heavyweight Legendary. This makes us consume any armor segments that we have on melee for 100% bonus melee damage, but also gives us a passive 50% melee damage increase when the shield is empty. So this always is increasing our melee damage in some way, at the cost of always being out of shield essentially because we're also meleeing constantly. We deal with the loss of this and the survivability through the passive node that gives us overshield on melee, and essentially just relying on that overshield proc to be so frequent and so high that we won't get downed. I also have a really solid modifier on this shield, up to 30% bonus damage, which scales with broken armor segments, so when I have no armor, this is at its full bonus. So we purposefully spend our armor on armor segments for bonus damage, then when we are out of them, we do bonus damage. You can also get ones that give you scaling movement speed with emptiness of shield as well, which is great for mobbing, as movement speed is really important, and I believe you can even find ones that have both the damage increase and the movement speed increase, but at lower actual numbers. And that mixed one would be the most ideal if you can. As for where to get this to drop, it is a dedicated drop from the Vile Prototype boss, who was unlocked during the story missions in Terminus Range, and his replay machine is right here. As for your enhancement, it does not matter. There is not a single enhancement or bonus stat that can roll on these that affects melee damage. I was running under the assumption that gun damage increase as a stat on enhancements would increase my melee damage because of the specialization node that gives melee a portion of gun damage increases, but for whatever reason it seems to not actually translate at all. Whether I have this on or not, it doesn't change my melee damage. As a result, I have found nothing on enhancements that actually boosts your damage in the setup, but you could get an enhancement for the sniper or whatever weapon that you choose to use for when you are downed, for the rare moments that will matter. Finally then, for equipment, let's talk about firmware bonuses. We want the full 3 tiers of Real Big Fist. This increases melee damage at tier 1, even more at tier 2, and then at tier 3 it triggers a Nova Explosion for 200% of melee damage when you get a melee kill. We then also want 2 tiers of Action Fist, increased melee damage for the first tier, increased action skill damage for the second tier, which also applies to us when we are meleeing with the Crucible Axes out. Then as for why we took 3rd rank of Real Big Fist instead of 3rd rank of Action Fist, it just ramps our damage much better. Both of these effects require killing enemies to actually trigger them, but Real Big Fist's explosion is damage that scales off of the hit that killed an enemy. So it includes the scaling from Groundbreaker, and also continues to ramp up Groundbreaker because the Nova itself does not count as melee damage. So the damage that this gets stores in Groundbreaker, makes it ramp up faster, makes all of our damage increase better. But again, this only happens if you fully kill an enemy, so it doesn't really matter in single target situations either way. Finally then, let's talk about how to actually play this build. For mobbing, it is relatively simple. Start a fight by using a rep kit, throw out your slippy grenades near some enemies, and then using your forge skill to activate Berserk and start stacking its damage up. Then you can whip out your Crucible Axes and just start running around slamming them into enemies' faces, and you never really have to do anything else past that point. You can just keep hitting things with your axes. The trick to this as well is right before the duration runs out, you can throw an axe. If you hit an enemy with a thrown flame axe specifically, it will prime them, and then we get action skill cooldown recovered when you pop that as a detonation, which you can do with melee damage because of our augment. Or if you throw it at the ground and walk over it, so if you miss an enemy, you also will recover half of a charge of your action skill cooldown. So whether you hit an enemy or not, doing this and throwing an axe at the end of the duration gives us cooldown refunds in general, which then helps us stay just permanently in double axe melee mode, and that is pretty much it. If you run out of charges of Crucible, just use your rep kit and you should be able to go right back in. And as long as you never go more than 5 seconds between dealing melee damage, the damage will just keep infinitely ramping upwards. As for bossing, it's really quite similar, except that we want to work the Tracker Dart Underbarrel in as well if we can. As you are starting the boss fight, use your rep kit, then throw out all of your grenade charges right on top of the boss, then use your forge skill to start Berserk and 6 seconds of immunity, so you can stand on top of the boss and melee them while the fish are bouncing without dying to your own grenades. Fire the tracker, use a second rep kit charge just to refresh the bonus, whip out your axes and start swinging them at the boss, and watch the damage just ramp up stupidly fast. Against anything that isn't shield health, this will kill it in seconds, literally just a few hits. Shields do take a little bit longer for the buildup, but even then it is incredibly quick, and this is just a fantastically fun way to play the game as far as I'm concerned. concerned. That just about does it for today, then, everyone. Your full melee build guide for Amon, the Forge Knight, that creams UVH 5 enemies in moments. This build may not exist forever because they could absolutely decide to nerf the way that Groundbreaker works right now, but while it is a thing, it is fun to actually have viable endgame melee builds, and I'd argue that Amon does it the best with the way that it all works currently. I hope you've all enjoyed this then, and I hope you enjoy using this build for yourself too if you try it out in the game. Like if you liked the video, subscribe to the notification bell for more, and most importantly, ladies and gentlemen, until next time,
I'm the conductor of the poop train!
Josh, Cotton, and Hollow with the videos, dropping the humor like a hammer on your tippy toes, bringing entertainment on a daily arrangement to take our insanity and turn it into entertainment. Yes, I said entertainment twice, to reiterate that it is nice to look into your faces on a mostly daily basis when you let us in your homes to make the whole world a stage. Goodbye.